Howdy folks, welcome to another episode of DevOps Diaries. It has been a rather long time since I was joined by one of my Gearset colleagues, and today I have the pleasure of talking to a good friend of mine, Valerio Chang. Valerio, welcome to the podcast, finally.
Hello, thank you for having me here today.
You are welcome, Valerio. Valerio, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about what you do at Gearset and what your role is?
Sure. I joined Gearset about 7 years ago. At that point, when we started having customers that had technical questions they wanted to ask, and we needed to free up our engineering team to focus on the feature writing, the creating of new releases. And at that point, I was brought in to kind of help with the kind of education, technical troubleshooting, gathering feedback of part of the job. So I joined there and basically started conversing with our customers about their technical usage, how they're adopting Gearset, gathering feedback and kind of feeding that back into the engineering team to improve the product. And that's been the start. And we've kind of grown, the team has kind of grown from one person doing customer support to date, we have 22 teammates across Chicago and Cambridge. And so my job has sort of evolved into building the team that contributes to that. So I've kind of gone from helping customers directly to now helping the company build a team of people to do that.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, 7 years, Gearset must have been what, 20 people or so back in those days. What was that like, and what's that journey been like for you to see the growth of not just Gearset but Gearset's customer base?
I often reflect on that. Like, I think it's a privilege to see the transformation. Like, not many people have that experience of joining a team of 20 people, a company of 20 people, let's say, and now being sort of in charge of a team of 20 people within a company of 300. And I have been really enjoying to see the things that change and also to see the things that remain true. I think when I joined 20 people, it felt like a group of people who just really wanted to get stuff done together. It was a very kind of collegiate, familiar feeling. We would go down to the pub at the end of Friday night, and there was a real sense of camaraderie because it could work out, it could totally fail. I joined the company knowing that most startups fail and don't make it, but now we don't really have that concern. We have different concerns now. Our concerns are like, how do we tap into a new side of the market? How do we tackle bigger, different shapes and size of customers? So the challenges are different, but kind of the underlying respect we have for our teammates, the respect we have for hiring competent teammates to get the same job done, that bit remains.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things, I spend a lot of time out in the Salesforce community and talking to Gearset customers at events, and one of the things, if you read any of the Gearset case studies or reviews online, G2, App Exchange, wherever it might be, is Gearset's customer support function is somewhat revered in the Salesforce ecosystem generally. And there's plenty of quotes, plenty of examples that we can pull out, which lauds you and your team for providing some of the best support in the Salesforce ecosystem, which is an incredibly, what I must imagine is incredibly heartwarming feeling and a gratifying feeling to get that kind of feedback consistently. What for you, from being there at the start of the customer support, customer success journey at Gearset, what's kind of been the ethos and the mantra as you've grown from just you and I think it was Jason, our now CEO, primarily running that, to now having a team of over 20 people providing support for Gearset users?
So the ethos has changed over the years. I think at the beginning, I just wanted to do a great job at learning technically how to kind of help out our customers and users in this new ecosystem. But more recently, I've kind of decided I want to take customer support at Gearset to become kind of the industry-wide known standard of what SaaS support should look like. I feel really strongly and proud that that's kind of sort of what I want to aim for one day. Like when we think about good customer service, when we think of good UI in the industry, everybody will have an idea of a particular brand or a particular company that they have in mind. And my ambition is to make Gearset's customer support the one that people think of when they think about customer support. And like, I guess I didn't intend to do that at the very beginning. I just wanted to do a good job. I enjoyed the report that we built with customers and our users, which we see as partners more than clients, if you will. And then when we started to get the response and the validation that we were doing something right, it kind of, we just built upon that and wanted to go down that route. I would like, for me, it still sort of blows my mind a little bit how receptive and our customers are. Like, I think about just software, especially like corporate business software that people use, and I don't think it's that normal to feel affinity to the software or the team that provides that software the way people respond to us. I remember the first time I was at a conference, and our users would walk up to us and go like, "Oh my God, you're Gearset," and it felt really kind of warm and different from how I think about like bigger companies that provide SaaS, and specifically for the support function to be recognized in that way. Yeah, it's amazing, and I think I want to credit Salesforce for creating that community in order to, I think there's a certain level of seeding of the tone of voice that Salesforce has done in the community, and we're sort of piggybacking on that. But it's been quite amazing, and yeah, I still think it's in a way unusual and extraordinary that people have this emotional response when we talk to them about making their Salesforce deployments work.
Yeah. You mentioned conferences. Has anybody ever come up to you and gone, "Oh my God, you're Valerio"? I've spoken to you loads of times.
It's happened more from the documentation side, but yes, in the beginning I was on. So we deliver customer support a lot of the time, not just through the instant messaging, but we go on screen shares a lot, and I think that's one thing that people don't sort of expect, and when we do it, they really appreciate. So there's that human connection of seeing the problem, of facing the scenario together. And we do have customers that, do come up to us and say that, which I every time have to pinch myself to go like, is this real? Is this like what a job looks like? And I kind of think about it this way, like, I like this saying that people will forget what you say, people forget what you do, but people will not forget how they make you feel. And I think that's one thing that kind of helps me kind of frame, like, at the end of the day, the feeling of being helped, the feeling of like I'm stuck somewhere and somebody is helping me out, that feeling remains with them and kind of generates a lot of goodwill in the long term, regardless of the technical details, regardless of like what you actually said or how you actually said it. And it's really like what feeling you leave people after that interaction that I think is a thing I've come to realize. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's really interesting. You mentioned being in a customer support function. If people are talking to you, they usually have a problem, right? So they're usually in some kind of mindset. They might be frustrated. They might be angry, maybe even sometimes, depending on how emotionally drained or stressed they are, because especially when you with Gearset, for example, they're probably doing a release of some kind, a big important deployment, or it's late for them. They've been working on something for 2 or 3 weeks. It's a massive business priority that these changes get shipped and what have you. But the Salesforce ecosystem is complex, and supporting a technical product within that ecosystem must present some unique challenges. Are there any routine specific hurdles that you and your team see Salesforce customers having that you are routinely helping them solve?
Sort of the answer changes over the years. So I think in the very beginning, it was like, at that point, Gearset was relatively new. People were trying to adopt something new, and like simplifying something complex like change sets into something that kind of point and click on the UI was the thing that we're trying to get people to get used to. People go like, what do you mean you don't have to do this thing that I needed to do before? Oh, okay. So I think the questions started out like that. As Gearset got more complex, we started going into kind of recommending best practices. So, for example, version control, the idea of having a source of truth the idea of branching out from like main branch and sort of the best practice of releasing often and small rather than having these like big releases every quarter. I think now what I'm seeing is like we're driving process change within the customers. We're no longer just talking about individual features or how do I do this? We're talking about how do I change a whole team of 20 developers to work together in a slightly different way? And that presents itself as a slightly different challenge it's no longer managing the technicalities of something. It's like, how do you manage people's emotions and background and what previous process they have in place? That's interesting. You're managing kind of we talked about the people, process, and product. Now, product is really, we're there with the product. Now it's trying to convince teammates, our partners really, to change their process to fit in with best practice. Yeah.
What's your take on how Salesforce DevOps has evolved over the last 7 years? I mean, for me personally, I've seen a significant shift from we want to get rid of change set stays to where it is now. What's your take on how DevOps has evolved and what people care about in those processes?
I would say, I appreciate it. I'm simplifying a bit. I think in the past, the process was about getting stuff from A to B, like deploying changes. And that's what most people wanted to talk to us about. I think maybe because of the user base changing and Gearset going for bigger customers, now the conversation is more about how do I integrate these best practices and kind of adopt and change people's attitudes and how we should do things. So we had a lot of conversations about convincing people basically that they need a source of truth, convincing people not to make changes directly in production. So it's gone from like, I just want something from A to B, now talking about like why you want a source of truth, or even just having almost philosophical discussion. Okay, so you just talk me through your process, but if I was to ask you like, how do you know which environment is your gold standard, that your source of truth? And if you can't answer that, what do you think we should do? It becomes the conversation is almost like consulting and trying to get to the nub of how they've structured their release process and figure out who owns what in what environment. I've seen that change throughout, and I think the industry has matured. Like we've gone from like just wanting to deploy things to like, okay, now I'm interested in knowing how I can get parallel streams of development between my developers.
Yeah, is that, would you say, the gold standard for customer success in SaaS then, or customer support in SaaS, is acting as a trusted advisor and consultant to your customers?
Yeah, I think at Gearset, we've taken customer success and customer support with a very distinct approach. I think in a lot of customer support scenarios, you can have this idea where customer support is there to just answer questions. Like the customer will ask us, how do you do this? And we will respond, and that's the end of the conversation. It's like what we call a sort of like question and answer.
Yeah, transactional.
Transaction. Whereas we kind of decided that we wanted to be quite assertive and be quite confident about the advice we're giving. Like we're very opinionated about what we think is good practice, and we will engage and try to convince a partner of that. And we can also understand that there's certain restrictions, maybe legacy systems in place that mean that you can't do that. But we want to be there as an educator and as a partner to kind of say, okay, we've seen this happen with hundreds of customers. We kind of know what pitfalls you might fall into. We can share those pitfalls with you, and wanted to be seen as a trusted advisor. So like we guide you down the path rather than we're just there to answer questions. And I think that's quite well received. I think, yes, like depending on the individual scenario, having somebody to guide you through a process and having the reassurance that this is a process that's worked and turned various teams around in the past that we worked with. I think having that credential makes people trust you and makes people more willing to take the step to make the change. Because at the end of the day, change is scary. Change is, as a customer, you're taking a lot of risk to change the process, and wanting somebody there to kind of handhold that process has become sort of what people come to us for, I guess.
Yeah. So I, it's my. I think we do. I think we do things right at Gearset. I think our team, your team, does things the right way in that consultative approach, and might be quite different to anybody else that might be in a customer support function that is listening to this podcast. Will probably might go, that's quite different to how we approach customer success. But if you were to speak directly to a customer support engineer at another software company, a SaaS company, and they were, what are kind of the key skills that, say you had somebody new join the customer support engineering team that you run, what's like your number one piece of advice for them as they're like onboarding and getting used to customer support, especially if they might not have done it before and never been in that type of role? What type of things would you advise them to focus on and lean on in those early days of providing great customer support?
I think if I want to distill it, is asking questions. It seems counterintuitive. I'll frame it a little bit. So typically when a customer starts conversing with us, they'll ask us a question. And I think sometimes they're not really used to the fact that we ask more questions to them before we give an answer. And that's the advice we give our teammates when they join. Like, unless you understand the problem, unless you deeply understand the scenario, your answer is just a service level question. Your answer is just a service level answer. You don't get to the nub of the problem. You don't understand why the customer is asking this. So in a way, if I want to distill it down, it's like your job is to ask questions to understand the problem before you attempt to give an answer. I think a lot of people will feel really odd, like, ooh, am I in a position, do I have authority to ask the question to a customer? But really, customers want to know that you care. You're asking questions because you want to know the background, the scenario. The fact whether this button exists here or not isn't the problem. Like, the button needs to do something. What does the button allow you to do? I'll give an example where I think one of the easiest example I can think about is a customer wanted to be able to view a backed up record in the UI. And because of the quantity of records, it was quite difficult to do so. So instead of me trying to just work out how to get the UI to load for them in the way they wanted, I asked them, what do they want to do with this information? Oh, then I found out, okay, through that questioning the customer, I was able to find out, okay, they wanted to not just view it, they just want to be exported. And I went, well, actually, we have another button here that exports it for you. So I don't even need to solve the question you asked me, but in the end of the day, we get what you want. And that's only achieved by really understanding what the scenario is, what the customer ultimately wants to do. So back to your question of like what advice I would give to people starting in this role is, don't feel afraid to ask questions. Like, questions means you care. Questions means you understand the customer's scenario better. And it's interesting because I think sometimes our customers aren't ready for that. Sometimes our customers reply and say, why are you asking me so many questions? And there is a little bit of like education there. It's like, we're asking questions because we want to give the best answer. And unless we understand the scenario, my answer may be completely off course. If I don't understand what the situation is, I could be giving the wrong answer. So we do have that conversation with customers as well sometimes, where it feels a bit odd that we're asking so many questions. But I say, like, in email, in instant messaging, asking questions can sound a bit like deflecting or like asking people to do things without having to do the work to kind of advise them. That I personally find the medium of a screen share or a call a much better way to kind of deliver that, to kind of dig into the scenario. So the medium also changes a little bit about how customers react to that part. Sorry, I went on a rant, but
no, that's not a rant.
Yeah, but yeah, like really understanding the problem and by asking questions is one of the best advices I can give.
Yeah, that's the really interesting how you mention having to educate the customer on why we approach customer success the way that we approach it, and customer support the way that we approach it, because it is probably quite unfamiliar to how they have dealt with other SaaS applications or SaaS customer support. They ask a question, they want an answer, and that's kind of transaction that they're used to. So that might be a little bit of a bigger lift for somebody who's just like, I just asked a question, I just want an answer, and having to explain to them and guide them and coach them. Just, we're here to support you on a wider, bigger, deeper level than you might have been previously used to. That's where the magic happens. That's where the magic happens.
Like, I think in technical SaaS support, I think our industry, for better or for worse, has this built-in expectation where you raise a support ticket, you fill out a form, and there are these compulsory fields that you have to fill in, and then the customer needs to pre-decide whether this is a severity 1 or severity 4 question. We've kind of chosen not to take that approach. We wanted a conversation. Like, that's why it's a chat widget. It's not a support form. We wanted to make it like, I think about it like when I talk to my family and they want support with how to use their mobile phone. That's how I think about it. I think about, like, you want to achieve something, you want to talk to somebody about it. I don't ask my parents to fill out a form and go through these hoops. Yeah. And I think I've taken that approach a little bit and went like, okay, I understand the industry may have these expectations about form. There may be an SLA attached to it. We will have status updates. And Gearset support is like that. Gearset support is very familiar, very friendly, very almost informal. And I think at some point we might have to adapt to how the industry expects us to work. But that's how we kind of set how it's just starting from a conversation to understand the situation.
Yeah. It's I remember, so I was an account executive at Gearset for 3 years before transitioning to the role I do now. And whenever I was in a deal cycle and we were asked about what our customer support is, and I said, it's all via an in-app chat. It's all live and you get answers from a real human in less than 5 minutes. They almost couldn't believe it, or it almost didn't believe it, or refused to believe it. Like, and is that still true, or is people or customers still surprised that they get through to a real human and they get a response from the team in such a fast turnaround when the average SLA in the industry is 24 hours, maybe 12 hours?
I think people appreciate it after the fact. I think when they're contacting us, they don't think about whether this is the expectation. I think a lot of people look at the in-app chat and think, oh, there's a sales and marketing function, and they may not expect it to get like technical support through it. So I think it's a place where we surprise people and impress people after they have that interaction with us. I think about a lot of times people do ask us, are you a bot or are you real in the in-app message? And I kind of always think about it like, I really want to reply like, what do I have to say to convince you one way or the other? Why don't you try asking? Why don't you try me out? And I think because we're in a world where artificial intelligence is, a very big topic, there is obviously that question. We've so far taken the route of kind of deciding to differentiate ourselves in the market by not going down the artificial intelligence route. And we want to have an interaction because we do see these interactions with the customers as valuable. We get insight into how they're using it. We even as customer support, we're a big part of the product and engineering cycle because we feedback so much insight about how customers get stuck, how customers get blocked, or how things are confusing. And if we were to automate that with artificial intelligence, I think it would be harder to get that insight out. Back to your question, I don't think the wider industry is super used to it. They're used to like being able to ring the phone number and having somebody join. They're used to support cases and forms. Like I have some experience with like retail customers that like retail companies that respond in this way. Um, yeah, but there is a point of differentiation. I hope that makes us stand out in the market.
Yeah, I would say it absolutely does. We talked about a lot about what customer success looks like at Gearset and what we think good looks like. But for you, I want to come back to the team that you've grown to. So back in the day, you, Jason, support from the account executives, from engineers. I remember my early days at Gearset getting involved in customer support chats and all that kind of stuff. And that actually taught me a lot back in the early days about what customers were trying to achieve and the ethos that you took. But scaling the customer success and customer support function at Gearset, what have been some of the challenges and how have you overcome those challenges in scaling to the size that you are now? Obviously, you have a globally distributed team, Cambridge, Chicago. What's kind of been the biggest learning curve for you in that growth?
So the way I think about it is, so my background is in engineering. So I was a sales engineer before I joined Gearset. I've always been in the kind of technical, talking about technical things to customers and explaining it. Through working with Gearset, I've also had the additional opportunity, and I'm really kind of amazed by the opportunity that exists here, to like go from a technical engineering conversation to like how do I build an environment where it fosters other people to replicate that. So I kind of gone from helping build a product, helping build a customer base, to helping build the team that delivers the customer success that we do now. When I signed up to join Gearset, I was never like, it didn't even cross my mind that one of the challenges I would have would be recruiting or how to maintain a team across two different geographical locations. And I've learned so much that I wasn't prepared to learn about, like managing people, managing other managers, kind of understanding what motivates people differently in the team, and kind of that was kind of for me the biggest learning curve, like understanding everybody's motivations and what gets them up in the morning. Yeah, that's been fascinating.
Yeah. What gets my team psyched to get out of bed and and help their customers, and the good feelings is if you were to ask one of pick anybody from the customer support team at Gearset, what would you say that is the thing that they enjoy most about their job and their role?
So I think the answer does come from the fact that the way we hire for this role and the way we've attracted people to this role. So we've always hired people who we've hired people that didn't have to have previous knowledge within the DevOps or Salesforce ecosystem or know anything about version control. We decided that we can teach you this. As long as we know that you have the technical ability to absorb that information, we're happy with that. But really, we look for people that enjoy the interaction with people. So we have lots of teammates from retail background, from hospitality, and it's that people-facing thing, I think, that makes it slightly different. And we look for the people who like talking and enjoy and get reward and get energy out of making somebody's day, really. Like at the end of the conversation, knowing that you made a difference in somebody's day and make them feel supported and helped and willing to come back to you for future interactions. I think that dopamine hit of somebody kind of really appreciating that is kind of the majority of what gets out of what gets us out of bed.
Yeah,
there is that element, and like I want to go back to earlier. You said like when people contact us, they're stressed and they're under pressure. But actually, what really impresses me is that we have built this relationship with our customer base that sometimes people just come to us to have a chat or come to us to say like, hey, this new feature that your engineers pulled out and released is amazing, or we want to give feedback on this. So it's not like it's turned into a real partnership. It's not just people asking us for help, but sometimes people willing to give us feedback, willing to kind of congratulate us on things that we've done well, and give us really constructive feedback about things they think we should change. Um, so it's gone to a very like two-way conversation. We're not there just to serve and give answers. We're there to also like understand how they work and get rewarded by the validation they give us.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely, and that focus on the people is something that gives me gratification. You say, for me, I step off stage after doing a talk, or somebody comes up to me, which has happened, and said, "Oh, I listened to this episode of the podcast," or "I watched that webinar that you did, and it really helped me understand that concept that you were talking about, or it was really useful for my role and what I've been thinking about recently." And that focus on the human satisfaction, providing that help and that dopamine hit that you mentioned. I have a retail background myself. It was the first job that I had out of college, and like I loved retail job. I loved helping people. I worked in the clothes shop, and like taking them to the till and the checkout, they're buying a few new pieces of clothes, and like they felt awesome because they were getting these new pieces of clothes, and you helped them on that journey, and that feeling good thing. I think that's something that's hugely translatable, like a human level and a human experience level, that making people feel good feels good, right? So that must be probably the one function at Gearset where you see that consistently, routinely every day, is in customer support.
I'll expand on that a little bit. I don't think this is exclusively in customer support or customer success, but I think another element that I think about what motivates people around me is seeing an impact. So seeing an impact in a customer's experience, but also actually a lot of times we see the impact we make on the product, and we see impact we make on the company. One of the other ways we get our dopamine hit is like a customer will give us some feedback. We can feed this back into engineering and product, and within a day or two, sometimes we release a minimal viable product to show the customer, like, is this what you're thinking about? And we see that we've made an impact to the wider product, something that is delivered to thousands of our customers at the same time, and genuinely making a suggestion that is then taken into account, that then becomes a product within a really short cycle. That ability to affect change, I think, not just in a customer, but also for the benefit of the company, benefit for the application, is a great motivator, I think.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that, if a customer can see, oh, by engaging with this team, like I've been able to shape the success of other people as well. So it's a two-way street in terms of that human satisfaction.
Yeah.
You get out what you put in, right? There's a direct correlation to how much effort you put in or how much investment you have in something is going to be directly proportionate to what you get out. Which I find interesting.
It's like when people make a feature suggestion, I can imagine a scenario where, okay, that's just put on backlog and never actioned on. But I think at Gearset and our customer base, we have routinely this concept of like a customer has affected change, and then they can go to their colleagues and go like, hey, that feature that you see now, that's because I, talked to somebody in customer support at Gearset, and that's, made that happen. So they feel a certain pride in being part of that process too.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to come back to another thing that you mentioned when you were telling us about being at events, and you mentioned documentation as part of customer support and customer success. What's the role of documentation in customer support as you see it, and what makes? Because I've certainly experienced this when I'm using platforms or products myself, and I go to their support documentation, and it's quite frankly not great, and that's like almost a barrier for me, like trusting them reaching out to the support. Like, am I going to get good support if I reach out to them because they don't have good documentation in the first place? Documentation, has that always been something that's been very front of mind to how you deliver and your team delivers customer support? And is there much escalation from this documentation didn't help me, I need to reach out? Like, yeah, your take on documentation in customer support. What is that?
So actually, I think something that might be quite different from other companies, the way we do it. Um, the documentation responsibility is within, like, sorry, the documentation responsibility is part of customer support. We don't have a separate documentation team. Documentation isn't delivered by engineers or the product team who make releases. I think the documentation is there to aid a user's adoption of Gearset or our application. So we've made a conscious choice to tie customer support and documentation together. And my rationale here is like the customer support team are the people who are handing out these documents, who are directing customers to read these documents. They're the people who know the customer, how they read it, and they're the people who get feedback most quickly from customers. So one of the things I enjoy getting feedback from the customer is like, can you read through this documentation and tell me if I can improve it? And if they do tell me, it is within my responsibility to make that change happen, and sometimes show that change really quickly to a customer. So the documentation is there to help us scale, but also like help us keep ourselves accountable. So at the moment we are not online 24/7. We have customers that will need to access this knowledge when we're offline, and being able to do that through documentation is how we make basically our understanding of how to support customers available. And there's a scalability element in there. But also, like, having to talk through everything without any screenshots to describe things is not everybody's way of understanding and like troubleshooting. So having documentation to go through the steps, having the screenshots to kind of illustrate things you're expected to see and things you're not expected to see becomes a crucial part in customer support. And that's why at Gearset we kind of rolled documentation responsibility as part of customer support. Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a novel approach, because I think you look at other platforms, other providers and what have you, and their documentation has been written by the engineers, and it says what this feature does, not how to use this feature or how to troubleshoot X issue. But you're the team that sees customers running into issues. Here's a piece of documentation that will help other customers solve that issue when they inevitably run into them at some point, and shifting that onus on, or having ownership and responsibility of making customers successful, even when you might not be accessible, really important and really valuable, I would say.
Yeah. And there's a kind of like selfish point where, like, when we grow the team, when we hire new teammates, the documentation is there to help us transmit that knowledge to other people in the company. I think I find it odd. Like, for me, it makes sense for the people who need to use the documentation most often to have ownership over the curating, the formatting, the distribution, and writing it in the language that a customer would understand. A lot of our users may not have English as their native language. Being able to communicate that information in a way that they can follow, that's the important thing. Like, what we write isn't the important thing. What it achieves for the customers is the end goal there. So you can write documentation that nobody understands. That doesn't really help. At the end of the day, like, trying to work with customers to say, okay, if I described it in this way, did it help you? If it didn't, how can I describe it differently? Because I want to help other customers in your situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Valerio, I was hoping that we could end the episode with a war story, because everybody likes a war story. What's the most challenging customer support request that you or your team have dealt with? And take me through it, what the request was, what you learned from it, and ultimately what the resolution was.
So you said a war story.
A war story. I was maybe being a little bit dramatic, I guess, but
I don't see it as a war or a conflict. I see it as, I guess, going back to like somebody in like massive distress. And it's interesting because, like, when we look back at it, none of these, none of the stories that stick with you are about a technical problem. they're rarely about a feature that doesn't exist or functionality that is going wrong, but it's usually due to like convincing people to change the process. And like this particular example I'm thinking about was a large team that have signed up to use Gearset, but the person who the team, the sub team that made a decision to adopt Gearset, well, I guess the nature of a big company will be that there will be a smaller group that will decide and spearhead and therefore take responsibility and have a lot of kind of credibility hinging on this working. And then they will bring on, 80% of the team who have not been through the purchasing and evaluation process to basically adopt a new tool.
Yeah.
So at this point, usually the person who's driving it has a lot at stake. Like it's emotionally important for them that this works out. And I think the particular story I'm thinking about is where I think it's dealing with kind of the emotional, understanding the emotional state of people who have made and advocated to invest in Gearset, to help them be successful, to help them convince the rest of their team. And actually, you could say this as one story, and you could also say this is a story that sort of repeats itself over and over because lots of customers are in a similar scenario where as we go into the larger enterprise space in the market, we do see more and more customers having this profile of somebody being almost reputationally responsible for adopting our
the champion.
best practice. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it then becomes, yes, there is the element of like, you have to be technically competent and be able to solve their technical problems, but also understanding that we're working with them to convince lots of people to change how they usually do things to how we're now going to do it. And like, honestly, technology is easy to change. Features, I can make that happen. We can get engineers to release features to do things really quickly. I think the hardest thing actually to change is behavior. You want to change somebody's habits and how they used to do things and their worldview. And they may come from very different backgrounds where they're already invested in different tools, or they've kind of invested the previous 5 years of their career episode in understanding how a different tool works, a different framework or a different version control branching strategy. And our job then becomes like convincing them to go on a journey of transformation, to go from what they were doing to what they're now doing, and reassuring them each step of the way. So when you ask me like the story there, like I think about the almost like counseling and guidance we have to give people on an emotional support journey. That becomes the thing that kind of sticks with me over the years, how we've kind of been able to convince people to make that transformation with us.
Yeah. Valerio, thank you. Thank you so much for your insight. One thing that I am always routinely impressed with all my colleagues at Gearset and everybody that we work with is just the very human approach that we all take to helping customers solve their issues and helping them. It's more, and you said this a couple of times or alluded to it many times throughout this conversation, it's more than just the tool. It's more than the technology. It's ultimately we're in a people business, and making people's lives better is what we're trying to do. And I think that is really foundational and critical to the success of the customer support team. And at the start of this conversation, I mentioned Gearset support being highly revered and lots of great props and kudos. Like, you routinely share the in-app feedback that you get from customers and the customer success engineer that has supported them and helped them. And I think this conversation just shows how much you and your team care about the humans behind the request, which is something that I hope everybody can learn from and take heed from, and that is ultimately what good looks like.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's, yes, underlying it, there's the technology, there's the engineering, there's the technical solution to it. But the more I spend time in this industry, in this business, in this role, I realize it's like yeah, it's how you make people feel. It's how people remember you helping them. That makes the difference and wanting to continue to go on this partnership with you.
For sure. Valerio, thank you so much. And thank you to all the listeners that have tuned in to this point. If you have, if you are a Gearset user and need support, jump in the in-app chat and ask for Valerio. He'll be happy to help you out. But anybody in that team, of course. Valerio, thank you for your time. Thank you for your insight. And again, thank you for holding the torch and being a bastion of great customer support and customer success.
Cheers.